I just don't really feel like it right now. Let's do it on Facebook. Motivation refers to those psychological processes that initiate, energize, sustain, and direct behavioral activity. So the primary theory we have to explain how motivation works is this, what's called drive reduction theory. And here's the basic idea. It all starts with a need. So your body goes into this state of some kind of biological or social dependency. Like maybe you need salt, maybe you need protein, maybe you need sleep, whatever. But your body has this requirement. So this need will then produce a drive. So a drive is an internal kind of like emotional state that's created by that need. It will make you become aroused and motivated. The third thing is response, and that is behavior. So the drive will then get you to engage in certain kinds of actions. It'll get you to behave in certain ways to satisfy that need. Now, satisfying the need, that's the fourth part of this model. That's the goal, that's the goal you're trying to achieve. And if you can achieve that goal, if you can satisfy your need by engaging in those behavioral responses, then you'll be put back into a state that we call homeostatic balance or homeostasis. So this is just the normal kind of state our body's in when we don't have any pressing needs. Now, there is something that makes this entire process a little bit more complicated, and that is incentives. So incentives refers to those external appeals of the goal beyond their ability to satisfy the need. So if you're hungry, there are many different things you could eat, but we tend to prefer things that have high incentive value, like tasty foods, sugary foods that usually aren't very good for us. Like you know that you could eat like celery, or that you could eat bland oatmeal, but instead you get Lucky Charms because Lucky Charms is freaking delicious. So that's just a clear example of a high incentive value kind of a goal. But there's definitely a trade-off between need and incentive. Goals that have a high incentive value, we're much more likely to achieve even if we don't really have a need. So not much need is required if there's a high incentive value. On the other hand, if a goal has a very low incentive value, now we're going to need a lot more requirement, where a much higher level of need will be required. So every time you engage in behaviors to try to satisfy some goal, it's always motivated by a mixture of internal needs and external incentives. Now, things that motivate us can either come from the environment or they can come from within ourselves. So when we're motivated by external things, like somebody's going to give us a cookie or give us some money or something like that, like we're being paid to do something, that's extrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation, it can be very effective, but for certain kinds of things, it's not the best. For tasks that require much more, self-direction, a lot more creative thought, for example, intrinsic motivation would be preferred. So intrinsic motivation is when the motivation, the desire to achieve a goal comes from inside yourself. It's like you just want to do that thing. You want to achieve that goal because it will make you feel good about yourself. It'll make you happy. We could break down all different kinds of motivations into three basic types. So you have biological motivations. These are things that we need to do in order to survive. Stimulation-based motivations. These are just things like curiosity, wanting to learn and explore. And then learned motivations, which tend to be more social in nature, like looking for social approval, things like that. So we'll talk about each one of these. Biological motivations, like I said, these are things that we need to do in order to survive. So I'm talking about hunger, thirst, pain avoidance, breathing, and so on and so on and so on. These motivations definitely aren't learned. You're born understanding that you need to eat and you need to sleep and so on. These motivations clearly help us to get back into that homeostatic balance. Like if you don't have enough, if you don't have enough water in your system, you'll become thirsty, and then by drinking the water, that will put you back into balance, and you won't feel thirsty anymore. But one of these that has gotten the most research, perhaps, would be hunger. So we know hunger is influenced, but not fully determined by the contents of your stomach. Your stomach is just one part of your digestive system, and your brain actually receives signals from all parts of your digestive system when it determines how hungry you should feel. And I'm sure you understand this to a certain extent. I'm sure you can relate when I talk about, personal experiences where I have, gone to the bathroom, and then shortly afterwards I suddenly feel very hungry. Like obviously there hasn't been any change in my stomach, but there definitely has been change, lower down in the digestive tract. Now, when your brain determines that you need to eat, it will release a certain kind of hormone. This is called ghrelin. So ghrelin is a hormone that's associated with the increasing eating behavior, and it's based on short-term signals in the bloodstream, and it's the hypothalamus that's largely responsible for this. So the hypothalamus will release this ghrelin, making you hungry. But there's also another hormone that can be released. This is called leptin, and leptin does just the opposite. So leptin, when released into your bloodstream, is a hormone that will decrease eating behavior. And this is mostly based on long-term body fat regulation. So I just said, there's this hormone, leptin, that can decrease eating behavior. Well, you might think, if I take artificial leptin, would that be a good diet? Like, would I be able to eat less if I put leptin into my system? The short answer is yes, but that's not that simple. If you want to hear more about how leptin could potentially be used to treat people with obesity, I've actually included a link down below. So check that out. But just to expand on that idea a little bit more, we naturally have variance in the amount of leptin and ghrelin between individuals. So this is largely genetics, like some people seem to be genetically programmed to have more ghrelin and less leptin, or vice versa. So it's you can think of it this way, and this is the basic idea of the set point theory, is that we are genetically programmed from birth to carry a certain amount of weight. So people that are born into a family full of, overweight individuals are very likely to become overweight as well, even if, they never see those people again. Even if they're raised in a completely different home, because of their genetics, they're more likely to become overweight. But there's many other things that can also produce an increase in eating behavior, like your emotions. When people are emotional, when people are depressed usually, then they tend to overeat. And the main reason why people with these upsetting emotions tend to overeat is because when you eat food, it actually makes you feel good. Like you have something in the limbic system we call the pleasure center, and every time you eat a good meal, it will dump chemicals like dopamine, and that just makes you feel satisfied. So it's like we're trying to treat our emotional problems by, eating a bunch of food and getting a lot of that satisfaction from the pleasure center. Now, if you are interested in losing a few pounds, I have some advice for you. The basic idea is that you need to not only restrict your food intake, but you also need to exercise. Exercise is the key here. For so many people, they are just, for whatever reason, too busy or too lazy or whatever, and they are unwilling to put in any amount of effort. Like, they're willing to starve themselves, but they won't get off the freaking couch and walk somewhere. So it's that getting up and moving around that you have to do if you're serious about losing weight. But like I said, most people, for whatever reason, they don't want to put in that amount of effort. They want the easy way out. And if you go on the internet or if you go to any store, you'll find plenty of easy ways out. But I would be skeptical. Most of these things they're pseudoscience. They're not real. They might work temporarily, but in the long term, that weight's just going to come right back again. So don't get caught up in the newest fad diets. I'm sure you know, and have maybe tried many of them and been disappointed with the results. Unfortunately, people who are overly concerned about their weight may suffer from one or more kinds of eating disorders. One of the more common ones would be anorexia nervosa. So this is self-starvation or just a complete lack of appetite that seems to be psychological in nature. So this mostly affects younger girls, girls that are very concerned about their image, about their appearance. And there's the root of this problem definitely seems to be in control. Like, these young girls, they just don't really feel like they're in control of their lives for some reason. Like, maybe people are telling them what to do, maybe people are telling them what to think, or how to dress, and so on. So they just feel like, for the majority of their lives, they really don't have much say. But they can decide what to eat and when to eat. It's kind of that old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, you can lead a young girl to a hamburger, but you can't make her eat it. That's the same basic idea. So she's just exerting this control when it comes to refusing to eat. A similar kind of eating disorder would be bulimia nervosa. So when I say it's similar, I mean the effects are similar, but it looks completely different. A person with bulimia is going to be eating all the time in great quantities. So I'm talking about like excessive eating, gorging. But that is then quickly followed by either the taking of laxatives or self-induced vomiting. So a person with bulimia oftentimes loves to eat, but they are unwilling to keep that food in their system. And just like anorexia, it's very difficult to treat, and it can do serious damage to the person's body. It can cause serious health concerns. But just not to be too graphic, but one of the obvious consequences of bulimia, if you're constantly forcing yourself to throw up, is that you're going to get stomach acid in your mouth and in your throat and so on. But a lot of people don't realize how acidic stomach acid really is. It's extremely acidic. Like, if you didn't have this special kind of mucus layer in your stomach acid would actually eat through the stomach lining and then start basically dissolving you from the inside out. And that's pretty serious. That can sometimes happen. But just think about this really powerful acid and think about it like in your mouth and in your throat. And that can obviously do some serious damage. And people with bulimia, they do sometimes have problems in, respiration, or maybe you'll notice that their teeth have actually begun to melt. It's pretty gross. Now, there's also a disorder that tends to affect men more so than women, and we call this muscle dysmorphia, which this refers to an excessive worry about not being muscular enough. So men with muscle dysmorphia will often, buy those bulk kind of protein things and that powder that they mix and they drink, all that stuff that's geared towards just building muscle mass. There'll also be those kinds of individuals that just constantly seem to be exercising and trying to be as fit as possible. But the reason why that we consider this an eating disorder is because they generally aren't healthy. Like, they might be muscular, but they're not healthy. And the reason why is because while they're trying to bulk up, they're also trying to reduce fat. So they're basically anorexics. They're not eating enough food. They're not getting the nutrition that they need. It is completely irrational. It's completely unrealistic to try to eliminate all of your body fat. We need a certain amount of body fat to be healthy, but people with muscle dysmorphia are trying to completely eliminate their body fat to make their muscles stand out more. So I've already kind of mentioned that the cause of a lot of these eating disorders is mostly psychological. Either it's about just not feeling in control of your life or just being obsessed about your appearance. But because of this kind of deep psychological roots of these eating disorders, they are very difficult to treat. The most effective treatment techniques for these kinds of problems tend to be cognitive behavioral, and we'll talk about those in a much later video. Thirst is another biological need, and this refers to our need for hydration, our need for water, to put it simply. But there's more than one kind of thirst. You have extracellular thirst, where you don't have enough water in the fluid surrounding your cells. And then you also have intracellular thirst, which refers to the water in your cells being drawn out. And you can best satisfy this kind of thirst by just drinking water. Now, pain avoidance is definitely also a biological motive. I mean, we need to try to avoid pain in order to survive. But pain avoidance is different from hunger and thirst in the fact that it's episodic. I hope you're not constantly worried about avoiding pain. I hope pain is something that just kind of occurs every so often, and it puts you into these special little episodes where you need to take certain actions to avoid the pain. So pain is definitely not homeostatic. There's no such thing as homeostatic balance of pain. It's just something that occurs in short bursts from time to time. Sex drive is definitely also a biological motivation. It's something innate. It's something we're born with. You don't need to learn to be motivated to have sex. But it's very different from the other biological motives, and the fact that it's non-homeostatic. It's non-episodic as well. It's just completely independent of your needs and your physical, requirements. I mean, unless you're like a teenager or something, you could probably agree with me that we don't need to have sex in order to survive. Besides those biological motivations, we also have stimulation-based motivations. Now, when I say stimulation, I'm not at all talking about anything sexual. I'm talking just about intellectual stimulation. Wanting to learn, wanting to, being curious, wanting to explore. These also appear to be innate, just like biological motivations, but they're not necessary for survival. One of the major ideas regarding these kinds of stimulation-based motivations is arousal. So arousal refers to your body becoming physiologically activated, tensed, stressed even. So we're talking about increased brain activity, increased autonomic responses, your heart rate's going to go up, you're going to start sweating, maybe you're going to start breathing heavier, your muscles will become tense. So this arousal will occur whenever you're just really, really excited about something, to put it simply. And this serves as the basic idea behind arousal theory. So arousal theory just is this idea that we prefer to have a certain balance of arousal in our system. It's kind of like we have a separate kind of homeostatic balance just for arousal. So if you become too over-aroused, then you'll be very kind of freaked out and stressed out. You might even go into a panic state. But if you don't get enough arousal, now you're going to become restless and uncomfortable. You're going to be bored. But it's not as simple as just that. Your level of arousal, being more stressed or more bored, that also plays an important factor when you consider the task you're trying to perform. So this refers to the Yerkes-Dodson Law. And the basic idea of this Yerkes-Dodson Law is that the more simple the task is, the less cognitive effort you need to put in to perform well on a task, the more arousal you're going to need. So if you're doing something relatively mindless, you need to be heavily motivated. You need to be heavily aroused. So it would probably be a good idea if you need to clean the house or mow the lawn or something, it'd probably be a good idea to like listen to music while you do it. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely tedious, and you won't be at your peak performance. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing something that's highly intellectual, something that requires, a lot of cognitive effort, a really difficult task, now you want to be at low levels of arousal. Like, you don't want anything to distract you. You don't want your annoying little brother in the room. You don't want there to be a TV in the background. You don't want anybody to even talk around you because you're focused on this task. Like maybe you're working on a paper, like a term paper, or maybe you're studying for a test. So these kinds of tasks that definitely require a lot of effort, you'll find that you could easily become very upset if anybody arouses you, anybody stimulates you in that sense. Now, some people just naturally prefer to have higher levels of arousal. These are people that we would say are high in their sensation seeking. So they tend to be more bold and independent. They like to try new things. They like to feel their adrenaline pumping. Like maybe they'll prefer to do things like go on thrill rides or jump out of airplanes or something like that. They're adrenaline junkies, you might call them. On the other hand, we have people low in sensation seeking, and these people tend to be more orderly, nurturing, and giving. They're more domestic. They like to just kind of hang around the house with friends and maybe have a few drinks, play some video games, whatever. They don't need to do anything outrageous to have a good time. Now, the last kind of motivations I wanted to talk about are learned motivations. Now, these are typically social in nature, and these are things that we have obviously learned to appreciate as we get older. So I'm talking about things like having social influence over other people, having some kind of affiliation or approval from others. One of the most commonly discussed social motivations would be need for achievement. So that's just your individual kind of desire to meet a standard of excellence. Now, most of us, we learn this from our parents. Like, our parents make it very clear what it is to be successful and what it is to be a failure in life. And we kind of instill that. We kind of make that our own, and we try to live up to those ideals. But there's other kinds of social motives, like need for power, for example. That's just some individuals learn to try to gain influence, like people who want to be celebrities, people who want to be politicians. That feeling, that wanting to be somebody important, that's that need for power.